For 2022, Signalis was my Game of the Year, a sapphic sci-fi survival horror fever dream loaded with influences, though by no means defined by them, ranging from director Andrei Tarkovsky's films to anime like Ghost in the Shell. So yeah, I fucking loved it. I've talked about it a bunch, I reviewed it, and I recommended it to anyone who would listen. But amidst lots of interesting discussion, perhaps the most common statement I saw was simply, what is happening in Signalis? Now, I don't mean to highlight this in any derisive way. I'm not here to call anyone stupid for leaving Signalis with more questions than answers. I did. It's a very dense, confusing game that almost outright refuses to be understood. But I've thought about Signalis a lot since I first finished it. I've replayed it multiple times. So I think now, just maybe, I'm actually ready to answer that question. And be warned, I'm going to spoil the entirety of Signalis, as well as the King in Yellow, Swan Lake, and also Mulholland Drive. Signalis starts out simply enough. Our protagonist, Elster, awakens aboard a derelict spacecraft, a Penrose 512 shuttle, which is possibly an allusion to mathematical physicist Roger Penrose and the Penrose interpretation, but we'll come back to that later. These shuttles are designed for deep space exploration beyond the edge of their solar system, with only two crew, a human and an android. There is no human aboard, only an empty cryotube. The ship is buried in an icy landscape. A photograph of a white-haired woman has been left behind. Leaving the safety of the craft into the icy surface outside, we follow a distinct Stonehenge-like structure to a pit, and there is a hole in the earth. It leads to a room with a radio receiving no transmission and a defunct computer. On the table is a book. If I found myself alone on a strange planet inside a strange room, I would simply not read the obviously cursed book. Those of you who have read The King in Yellow know it's a book about a book, a play in book form even, called The King in Yellow. An elusive text which we only get fragments of as it plays a role throughout the collection of stories, driving various characters to madness. It gives Elster a vision, prophetic or of memories is unclear. There are quotes from Lovecraft, and then we find ourselves in a bathroom completely disconnected from that room, with no sense of whether what's happening now takes place before, after, or adjacent to what we just saw. We're playing as Elster, an android defined by the in-game society as replicas. Each type of replica is given a designation: Protector, Yule, Folk, Elster, and we soon come to realise they're machines with consciousnesses built from copies of human minds, to give them the right psychological profile and skill set for the jobs they're built for. But they also appear to inherit their idiosyncrasies, and perhaps even their memories. Humans are called gestalts, a German term for a school of psychology whose approach deals with how humans perceive patterns, not individual parts. And yes, that's important. From this point on, Elster finds herself in a decrepit mining facility, Sierpinski 23, on the planet Lang. Elster's goal is to find the woman she loves, Ariane, whose photograph she has at hand. This place and the planet are governed by the nation of Yusan. It governs a single unnamed star system in which Lang resides, and is, essentially, East Germany in space. The facility is in decline, a totalitarian regime in its death throes, decaying to the core, running on obsolete technology. We find living quarters where miners are forced to live in cages. Classrooms have secret observation rooms. Cameras silently follow your every move. As if that wasn't bad enough, there is living flesh growing out of some dark corners. The rot has set into its inhabitants. Shambling humanoid horrors that we come to realise are fellow replicas, ravaged by a mystery sickness but unable to die due to their mechanical bodies. Their very presence distorts the screen, even when dead, as if they can reach out of the game to harm you. We're not entirely alone here though, as Elster bumps into several other survivors, mostly androids, amidst the horror. Most are hurt or hiding, simply wishing for an escape from this hell they're in. From one of them we hear about Ariane, and the likely place to find her, the mine below the facility, where the workers were all sent. Most notable of these survivors is a woman, a gestalt named Isa, And this is maybe just obscure Scottish trivia for most of yous, but it took a lot of effort to not imagine this woman whenever I said the name Isa.
Shut up.
This means that I'm getting into jeans.
Anyway, she's looking for someone too. The next most notable character is this asshole, Adler, the facility's administrator. He initially seems interested in why you're here, even saying that he knows who you're looking for, right before he shoves you down an elevator shaft. This is where Signalis begins to take a turn. When we awake from our fall, Elster finds the elevator shaft full of, well, other Elsters. Piles of android corpses. When I first saw this, I was frozen by it. The implication is obvious. We are the latest in a long line of Elsters who have come here, but it's a reality too horrifying to acknowledge. As if the only reason Elster survived is because her own previous failed attempts piled up enough to break her fall. Down here we encounter the often mentioned commander, who fell sick before anyone else. They remain in a coma. This is Adler's counterpart, Fulk, a replica that according to the Yusan government's own literature is not only a commander, but a near godlike figure, deliberately created to resemble their great leader from the revolution. While Adler handles the facility's admin, she commands all of its replicas. Directly, in fact, through android telepathy. She has a container with the key you need to access the mines, which is opened by playing music from Act 2, Scene 14 of Swan Lake. This music might not immediately jump out at players amidst the myriad of references, with various classical and romantic period pieces already used throughout, but if you know Swan Lake, this is an especially ominous piece to use. Swan Lake, for those who don't know, is the story of Prince Siegfried, who falls in love with the princess Odette. Odette, however, due to a curse cast upon her by a sorcerer, spends her days upon the titular lake, transformed into a swan, only to become human again upon nightfall. Only true love can break the spell. After being tricked by the sorcerer, Siegfried has pledged himself to another who appears to be Odette's mirror image, causing the princess to give in to despair, turning back into a swan and end her life by throwing herself into the lake. The prince leaps in after her, also dying, but breaking the spell with his devotion. In death, the two are united for eternity. Elster travels deeper, down to the bottom of the facility's massive pit. Express elevator to hell. Let's go. In the mines, Elster encounters a frankly ungodly amount of foes, as if they've been gathering here the whole time. You might encounter these two replica, one dying, sharing a final loving moment together. Like the use of Swan Lake, the deployment of this scene can't help but feel like a dire warning for Elster's own story. And you'll encounter Bale, who's just the darned sweetest darling, and god damn it, why wouldn't the game let me save her? At the bottom of the mine, a hole in the earth is waiting. Well, we've come this far. Down here, far below the planet's surface, we stumbled into some abandoned experiment site, a place the game calls nowhere. Bodies lie on tables, little more than humanoid-shaped viscera. Rust claims every surface, and there is a mass of writhing flesh beneath the floors and behind the walls. Is this the source of the horror? Some monstrous discovery now broken loose? Exploration only reveals stranger secrets, with ritualistic shrines and a door that needs 6 symbolic plates to open. Alien, man-made? Some kind of cosmic object locked away? Wandering down here for the first time, it took me a good few minutes to notice. Maybe you realise quicker. But at this point, the game's rules start breaking down. Before this point, the established logic of leaving and entering a room is clear. Exit via the top of a room, enter via the bottom of the next room. But here, and whatever this place is, those rules cease to apply. You can exit one side of the screen and enter from a side that doesn't correspond at all. Reality itself is breaking here. But even deep below, we're still not alone. Isa has made it this far, and even rescues you despite knocking herself out in the process. Whoever she's seeking, she seems as determined as Elster. We complete the ritual to open the door, assembling all the plates, and enter to find ourselves in a pit of flesh resembling the same pit from the game's opening. Adler is waiting nearby, certain he cannot pass the threshold of the archway, another landmark from the start of Elster's journey. He tells her that Fulk returned and was made sick by whatever she encountered out there. Elster doesn't care. She walks alone across a red desert littered with columns, monoliths that remind me of the long-term nuclear waste warning architecture. structures made to be so foreboding as to hopefully deter people from ever venturing near them. The template for a corresponding warning message can even be found in the depths of nowhere below the mine. She has visions of Ariane, as if she's reaching out to touch her mind. Along the way are other Elster corpses, and waiting on the far side of this red wasteland is the horse she rode in on, the Penrose spacecraft. As Elster nears it, the messages and images on screen become more intense until she's struck by whatever mysterious force surrounds the Penrose. She persists, climbing to the vessel's hatch, and as she tries to open it, her life flashes before her eyes, summarised in her lover's paintings, recreations of Bauckland's Isle of the Dead, mass reproduced in our world, and with memories that aren't her own. She shatters. She breaks. Elster dies, failing her doomed quest, unable to find Ariane, unable to keep her promise. Signalis tells a simple tragedy about the futility of not letting go. So here's the kicker. The King in Yellow, the titular play alluded to within the book, is something we only glimpse through fragments, as I mentioned. But the thing is, the fragments all come from Act 1 of the play. The second act, where its truths are apparently revealed, but which we never get to see, is what drives people mad. This is Signalis' second act. When Elster's eyes go dark and the credits roll, it'd be pretty reasonable to assume the game is over. In a way, it's absolutely designed to be an endpoint if you want it. If you're anything like me though, i.e. prone to overthinking, you caught on right away that there was more. Elster's bleeding eye at the main menu hints at a change, and there is no continue option, only begin. It brings us back into Signalis. Elster waking up on the Penrose, but not as you first visited it. It's intact, powered. Elster wears a dinky little uniform hat, and most important of all, she isn't alone. Ariane is here. With only each other on their mission, they've fallen for each other. Ariane paints and teaches Elster how to dance. They kiss. She plays Schubert's Serenade from his Swan Song collection. For a brief moment in this nightmare, there is happiness. Too brief. Elster awakens from the memory in snow. No hint of the violent red landscape where she was injured. She crawls to the Penrose and finds a crack in the hull. Inside is a mess, more decrepit than the merely empty vessel we left at the start of the game. The implications from gruesome diary pages left lying around are obvious. It seems at some point the Penrose's reactor failed, and Ariane fell sick with radiation poisoning. Elster put her into emergency cryofreeze, hoping that somehow she could save her. Elster is still holding on to that hope. But she doesn't find Ariane, only this pulsating meat in the pod. Or is this Ariane, transformed by time? Elster has no questions. She is on the warpath. She has a promise to keep. She salvages body parts from a previous dead self, using her own corpse as armor, cannibalizing her own failure to make it back. In her absence, the facility has become overrun with that red flesh, growing out of doors, taking over the space. But Elster doesn't find herself back in the mining facility for long. After jumping down yet another hole, even deeper into this hell, she finds herself in Rotfront, Ariane's homeworld, an entirely different planet, or at least it should be. And not just her homeworld, specifically the neighbourhood where she spent a portion of her youth. Though if you've been paying attention, this might not feel so out of place. Throughout the game we get visions that are more than visions. In the earliest, near the outset of Elster's journey, we have to open a butterfly box with a distinctive square key. Inside we find the Plate of Eternity, which won't be relevant again until we reach Nowhere's Gate. The plate alone is a hint towards the stranger places to come, but once taken, it transports us to an isolated radio shack, Ariane's home for a time where she stayed with her aunt. This shack is filled with music we now know is the song she plays for Elster, their song. And there you pick up a radio that you still have when the vision's over. Other visions follow with similar results. Physical items are transferable between these spaces, implying that they're more than just visions. So have we travelled across time and space? Or were those places brought to us? Exploring the streets and apartments, we get our first hints of an honest-to-God answer when the game introduces the concept of bioresonance, a person's ability to be in tune with the cosmic song of the universe. Psychic powers so powerful they can shape reality itself. It's what sustains Yusan, allowing their great leader to break them away from the Empire, and why its technology has stagnated, depending on a handful with these abilities to prop up their whole society. Even the creation of replicas depends on bioresonance, which builds their consciousness out of another person's memories. Here in Rotfront, it is strongly implied Ariane has this ability, though it seems steps were taken to conceal it by her family. So is everything we are seeing a world created by her, one warped by her? Room 512, where a patient that was most likely Ariane stayed, has the same number as the Penrose shuttle. Everything is folding back on itself, everything repeating. Waiting for us at the end of this section is yet another repetition, a hole in the wall. One last time we crawl inside. It takes us to the same room at the start of the game, which we now realise is Ariane's room. The King in Yellow waits to be picked up yet again. Elster says the final seal has been broken. Time to go home. She clearly knows more about what's happening than we do. Ahead, we get a brief moment to explore Ariane's apartment, the place she was taken to after being dragged from this little shack with her aunt, locking her into the path that will lead her to Elster, but also her doomed mission. Ariane reads and paints, watches old movies, desperate to find an escape from her life. Now it has become not only her prison, but Elster and everyone else's. Falk, the Sleeping Beauty, awaits. Through telepathy, with each cycle she was exposed to more and more of Elster, the only constant in a world slowly degrading, slowly being consumed by meat. Falk is Elster's Doppler, like Prince Odette had in Swan Lake, a near mirror image come to tear her from her true love. Falk wants to complete the process and become Elster fully, or as she puts it, let us become whole again. Far from another battle with a monster of flesh, metal and grime, Falk is angelic, levitating, lifting objects with her mind and bombarding Elster with psychic damage. The stakes are beyond survival now. Upon defeat, Falk only utters, "Now we are one." Elster returns to the Red Gate, where Adler is waiting once again. He's certain that the world won't sustain another cycle of this ongoing hell, and if Elster leaves, it'll all be over. He won't allow that. He stabs Elster. She shoots him. Both ensure the other's demise. Adler begs, but Elster is unwavering. Again, she treks out across the Red Desert to the Penrose, only this time, she doesn't break. She opens the hatch and enters. Back in nowhere below the surface, behind the nuclear warning door, is a crypt, with a shade on the stone casket. It's a match for Sleeping Falk, for Ariane in her cryotube. The same music in all three locations. A biohazard, locked away now warping the world around her. An ancient mind Ariane reached out to, Akira's style, and was damaged by? Or perhaps, nowhere is the vestiges of a previous cycle, consumed by flesh. A theory that gets a lot more credible depending on which ending you get. And which of the three endings you get depends on how you play. Most players will likely land on the memory ending, if they played like a regular survival horror player, conserving ammo, avoiding enemies. In this ending, Elster finds Ariane in her cryopod. Exploring the Penrose beforehand, it's clear that Penrose's crew were almost certainly doomed to die, sacrifices in the pursuit of colonial gains. Contingencies were put in place for their seemingly inevitable deaths, encouraging the Gestalt to have their replica put them out of their misery, leaving the android alone to carry out the mission. Ariane clearly didn't choose this. In the flashback, we can find an envelope with instructions on how to manage the Elster unit, urging the Gestalt crew member not to form a bond with them. The envelope is unopened. She chose to stay with Elster. Now their prolonged suffering has left them warping the world around them with their dreams. Ariane no longer remembers Elster. The android decides to stay by her side anyway, laying down and bleeding out. In the promise ending, obtained by playing aggressively and letting nothing stand in your way, Ariane recognizes Elster and asks her to end their nightmare by killing her, which Elster isn't sure she can do. But for her love, she finds the strength and then lays down to die by her side. In these two endings, she dies in the same position as the body Elster salvages her armor from, implying a closed loop where perhaps things play out again, regardless of these endings. Then there's the third, the leave ending. In this ending, Elster doesn't go to Ariane, but wanders back outside, laying down to die alone, like the many bodies littered out in the area surrounding the Penrose. Which is the real ending? If they're all canonical, which comes first? The answer lies with the song played over the credits. The Schubert song that becomes Elster and Ariane's theme is from the Swan Song collection, whose order, or track listing if you prefer, is debated. It was published after his death, so there's no knowing the intended order. How appropriate for a game whose own chronology is endlessly debatable, though maybe thinking of it on a timeline isn't the right approach at all. Let's talk about the Penrose interpretation of quantum mechanics. You might have heard of the many world or Everett interpretation, in which all possible outcomes of quantum measurements are played out in other worlds, or parallel universes. It resolves the paradox of a Schrodinger's cat by suggesting that rather than the cat being neither alive or dead until it's observed, it is both, just in different universes. Okay, well, the Penrose interpretation basically suggests that mass's warping of space-time, which we experience as gravity, prevents multiple states from occurring in most macroscopic systems, i.e. humans. It is the glue that holds reality together. By invoking this, we can assume that through the game's bioresonance, this glue has been removed, and things can exist in multiple places and times at once. In Signalis, all its endings and cycles exist together, played out in all their configurations. They're not separate universes, but the very corruption of reality itself. Swan Lake, which foreshadows so much of the game, was a score revised after its composer's death, and has numerous versions used by ballet companies. There is no one Swan Lake, and if you know Swan Lake, you know there's one possible ending we still haven't seen in Signalis. A secret ending. Some people might have noticed, either at the start of the game or at the end, a safe in Ariane's room, locked by 3 padlocks. The method to acquire these keys is oblique, to say the least. Fans scoured the game for clues and eventually used an SSTV, slow scan television, which can transmit and receive images over radio, on an obscure transmission. Signalis is a game full of broadcasts, with many puzzles relying on the use of Elster's radio. From these images, they discovered 3 locations in the game, where if you tune into certain frequencies, you can find a key. Love, eternity, sacrifice. To open the safe, you then need to put a code into the keypad, the string of numbers from the transmission that opens the game, that was heard aboard the Penrose, calling to Elster and Ariane, that seems to broadcast from Ariane's own bedroom. Inside, and possibly, is a white lily, with which Elster completes a ritual, dying alongside various versions of herself, in a circle before she and Ariane are seen dancing together aboard the Penrose, united in death for eternity. Are they literally reunited, given Ariane's power, or merely figuratively? To answer what is happening in Signalis, let me explain what's happening in another story people find confusing and hard to follow. David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive, in the simplest terms, follows Betty, a young woman arriving in Hollywood who dreams of becoming a star. She meets Rita, an amnesiac woman who doesn't know who she is. Betty cares for her and tries to help her find the truth while launching a successful acting career for herself. The two fall for each other. When Rita remembers a name, Diane Selwyn, they track her down, leading them to find a body, dead for several days. This later prompts Rita to take them to a music performance, a song which carries on after the death of its singer, a performance that brings both characters, inexplicably, to tears. A key, which Rita had the whole time, opens a box Betty now finds in her bag. They open it, and both disappear. Now we meet Diane, a woman who looks exactly like Betty, waking up in the apartment where they found the body. She's in love with a woman who looks exactly like Rita, called Camilla, except Camilla doesn't love her back, and Diane's career is a failure. Now this will, much like Signalis, depend on your interpretation, but it's commonly agreed Betty and Rita are a dream, a projection of Diane's hopes and desires. The world they live in is strange and nightmarish because it, like the nation of Yusan and Adler, have to conceal the facts lest their world crumble to pieces. Signalis echoes Mulholland Drive's story, but you're not cast in the role of Betty, but of Rita, a subject caught in someone else's dream. Elster isn't amnesiac, but her own memories are distorted by those belonging to someone else. It would be easy to suggest Signalis simply does not wish to be understood. I think that's not entirely true. It refuses to be pieced together into a linear story, but its myriad of influences, images, and illusions all contribute to its themes. Even if you don't know Schubert or Mozart or Chopin, or haven't read The King in Yellow, or seen Mulholland Drive, don't speak German, you probably get it. Signalis is about the terror of reality itself crumbling around you. For most of us in 2023, we wake up each day and are bombarded by information. News, memes, stories, tweets, videos, essays, articles. And how do we know what's real? We live on the precipice of AI-created images and audio deepfakes abound that will erode our ability to tell what's real and what is a lie. An onslaught of signals. We live in an age where reality itself is under attack as late-stage capitalism contorts to hide how broken it's become, determined to perpetuate itself despite falling apart. Every day, trans people and women have autonomy over their own bodies taken from them, where even names have to be fought for. It's surely no coincidence that Signalis is populated almost entirely by women, almost exclusively presented as queer, who are androids with no ownership of their bodies. What do we do in the face of all that? Isa's journey parallels Elster's own and ends when she becomes so overwhelmed with despair, she literally dissolves before our eyes. Adler has chosen to become administrator of this nightmare, determined to manage each cycle and ensure events follow the same course, even as the world clearly suffers from going on like this. He has become part of it, walking red meat. Elster has no control of the reality around her, and yet, unlike everyone else, she remains. Facts might be elusive, but you can always find truth. We never learn what Elster and Ariane's promise to each other was. In place of facts, we are forced to project our hopes onto these two characters. I can't resist thinking their promise is simply a devotion of undying love, that they'll be there for each other no matter what. Based on the amount of fan art I've seen out there, I'm not alone in that hope. Like Ariane, we're seeking escape and refuge in stories. It is a game, like many of its influences, like Mulholland Drive, that is impossible to understand literally. It requires introspection to derive any meaning from it. There is no surface level story to tightly grasp onto, there is only subtext. As Signalis explained, just ain't gonna cut it. I don't think it's an accident the game divides its two acts with mirrors. It asks us, what do we choose to cling to in place of a knowable reality? Our independence or agency? Maybe happiness wherever we can find it, or love to those we care about, to a promise. Perhaps this is hell, but hell is other people. Hey folks, thank you for watching. This video took a while and was a real labour of love that simply would not have been possible without the support of my patrons. If you like my work and you want to see more of it, please do join my Patreon. I can't do any of this without my patrons. And to those of you that already support me, thank you so much. Your contribution makes a world of difference and allows me to do and make these videos.